Okay, welcome to TC meeting for io.js on the 18th of, it's not the 4th, is it? It's the 18th of March today. So we have Ben, Bert, Chris, Fedor, and Trevor, and myself, Rod. And we have a relatively small agenda today. So um, we might do a mini stand-up first. So Ben, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, the same as last week, fixing bugs, reviewing pull requests. That's basically it. Bert?
A lot of my time was spent doing things unrelated to IOJS because I was moving. I'm still still settling here. On the work front, actually, I spend a lot of time debugging Windows issues and like trying to figure out what our test failures were causing. And yeah, that actually took most of my time. The other thing is I'm working on a different CI dashboard. I know this is not part of the build working group, but I think it would be really helpful um, for just seeing what's going wrong and not getting into this situation where once a build fails, everybody starts ignoring the CI. If we have a better breakdown of what's going wrong, and in order for it to not become a super like never-ending bird project, I'm just building a nicer dashboard now, which pulls logs of the current CI and presents them in a very clear way, with like sort of a Git timeline on the side. I hope actually that by the next CC meeting there will be a prototype that I will actually host it on CIWB for now, so for people to look at. Was there anything else? Not really, or maybe there was, but I forgot. The next one, I guess, is Colin. Sorry, Chris.
No, totally fine. So for the last week, I've been working on. There was a couple issues. I broke the Windows build by merging the additional requirable modules, the preload modules thing. Sorry about that. Reverted that. And some debates on the major version bump and trying to put together a bird's eye view of a release process and channels and things like that. So sort of that perennial project. And working on some static analysis tools so that we can have some insight into the amount of breakage a given change would cause and what a possible mitigation, how much could that fix of that possible breakage. So that's been fun to work on, and I should have that out, or at least some parts of it out this week. I believe next is Fyodor.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so, well, I was reviewing a pull request from Ben with his bug fixes. I was also working on the PayPal memory leak issue, which is probably unrelated to TLS after all, but yeah, anyway, it appears to be happening still. And yeah, we still don't have any resolution, but I'm working hard to figure out what could be the cause of it. Also, I was working on fixing the tests on Windows and figuring out whether it was a stream base or something else who broke the tests. Yeah, and it seems to be not stream base. And recently, I was working on adding a flush method to a net socket so that it would properly shut down the writable end of the socket when it's needed and wait for the shutdown to complete before destroying the socket. So basically, that's it for me. I think next is Rod.
Sure. So I've had a busy few weeks where I haven't actually been able to catch up with things, but I've started to get through my backlog, a lot of which is related to the build project, which is unfortunately in its process of stall, mainly through to me being a bottleneck there. So trying to rectify that and empower other team members there. So yeah, so I'm working also on the 1.6.0 release. There's a couple of, I haven't checked my emails this morning, but there's a couple of concerns about getting that whether that pull request for the require modules on startup can be merged again, or and also I was wondering whether anyone here thinks we should wait for the OpenSSL upgrade, or should we just do that as a patch upgrade, like in a day when it comes out? I can get feedback on the issue there, but that's certainly something that we can release today, but we probably have to release a patch release tomorrow.
I would say. Oh.
Sorry, but I would say that we hold off for another day and merge in the OpenSSL upgrade, because it's presumably going to be necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, word has it that it's going to be a serious security issue. So it depends also on how much time you have. I don't really care. I think it also shows a responsibility if we do another update a day later.
The patch update for that is actually really simple to do. It's the bigger job is getting these major ones out where I have to go through and make a readable changelog out of some of the major items. That's really the biggest part of this process, is making it digestible by humans rather than giving them just a dump of the commit log. But a patch release just for OpenSSL would be pretty simple.
I wonder though if we want to, like, so the thing is, there's not so many people running io.js in production, of course, but it is risky for people. Like now they have to upgrade to 1.6, and they have to, and they have to do that because of a security issue. I wonder if it's also good to do another 1.5 release with the updated OpenSSL.
Well, it's a semantic version, so it's like it doesn't really matter whether it is 1.6 or 1.5 and the next patch version. The compatibility is always on.
Well, I mean, so there's always a little bit. There's always. Oh.
To the second item on the agenda, which is the whole stream-based thing, because it actually covers the same stuff. So I'll just put it in here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's finish the stand-up.
Okay, so the next one is Trevor. Sorry.
No problem. Miscellaneous pull requests and helping. Like, we're going to be covering the process next tick one. Also, I found a new timer bug, which is fun. I can get set timeout to fire twice. So look into that a little bit. Miscellaneous things.
Okay, let's move on then. So we have apologies from Michael, and who else do we have apologies from? Isaac was not showing up here.
Dominic also apologized.
Oh yes, Dominic is in a bad time zone. Okay, so review of last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago. The sync.io regression came up again. You'll have to forgive me because I wasn't here for most of the meeting. So if anything stands out here, please comment on it. The issue number 848. What is that one?
That's about hiding modules like free lists.
Internal modules.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yep. There was a resolution on that. That was to merge that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it still seems like a good idea to me. I think Vladimir asked me to do a final review, but I probably haven't done that yet, so I will go do that.
Okay, the next one was the improving performance of the URL module. So that was from Petka. I hope I'm getting that name right, but I think the change there, it was a major change to the URL module. What was the resolution with that one?
I don't think it was a major change.
Oh, okay.
Well, I remember people speaking about a major version bump for that, but if I recall correctly, it's changing a few properties to getters to lazily compute data, and that seems to me like it's a fairly trivial change, not something that merits a major bump. So I'm kind of confused.
So it changes the properties of the URL object to setters and getters. So if you set something, it'll update other properties, which is a breaking change from old URL, which was you could just change different properties on it and it would be fine. So if people have code that takes a string, turns it into a URL object, and they manipulate some bit of it and delete some other parts of it, they might have to change their code. So I think that's the reasoning behind the major version bump there.
Okay, but
Exactly.
if it's a setter, then I'm not sure I understand why that's a major change or why people would have to update their code. I mean, if you make the setter smart enough to take changes into account.
So if they're doing something like they've got a sequence of so they update host name and then they delete host or something like that, they may have to change their code. Or if they are setting in a certain order, they may have to change the code. Sorry, I'm kind of thinking through this on the fly. But so if they encounter a certain order in the setters, like it would previously assume that changing one property wouldn't affect the others, and that seems like it could be pretty easily be a major version bump.
Can we move this discussion to GitHub, by the way?
I'm +1 on that.
Okay, so but I think the reasoning was mainly about a conservative approach to versioning, not just breaking people's code in a minor bump. So then there was shipping WebSockets in core. Where did that get to, Bert? That discussion?
Well, two things. I had some Oracle-ish thoughts on web servers.
Just stop right there.
Nothing came out of that. And the other thing is what turned out to be is the immediate issue was that right now WS is a compiled add-on, and that's a pain. But it turns out that only implements a couple of buffer transformations, and those buffer transformations actually are useful. So we decided that we would just add those in core. I think actually Chris was going to do that.
Yeah.
And that was the outcome of that discussion.
Okay. Then there was the discussion about upgrading V8 to 4.2, and I believe there's more discussion going on GitHub about major versions and Canary and that kind of stuff. And I don't see a whole lot of resolution around the topic of versioning and how to make releases Canary style. And I'm interested in how we're going to actually come to a resolution on that.
Yeah, based simply on how many comments are and how long each comment is, I don't think that's going anywhere anytime fast.
Yeah, I agree. But I suspect the versioning is probably going to come back up to the TC sooner rather than later. But anyway, Colin resigned from the TC to spend less time in meetings and more time with code, and I understand that. So let's get into the meeting proper. The first item is pull request number 1134, which is to add the Docker working group. And the pull request is just changing the working groups document. So I guess this is where the rubber stamp process of the TC comes into process. If anyone has any objections to adding a new working group for Docker, it was originally my conception of this was that Docker would hang off the build working group. But I actually think this makes sense for it to be separate because we were talking about being a sub working group, mainly because there's actually very little crossover in the personnel or the skills and experience. So having them as a separate working group makes sense. It's just that we maintain some Docker images for build, but that doesn't mean that they have to be managed by the Docker working group. So I think it's.
Of course, I will rubber stamp this. If there's people that are interested and want to do this work, then who am I to say they shouldn't, right? I'm a bit curious what this Docker working group is going to do. Are they going to maintain Docker images that make it really easy to run io.js? Is that the idea?
They already do. So we have a docker-io.js repo, and that is the official images for Docker. So if you go and do a Docker run io.js version, whatever it is, it actually pulls down from those images. So they've become official Docker images very quickly, and they're maintaining it. They're doing a really good job. The pull requests are fascinating to watch them trim down the size of these images, and yeah. And they catch up with releases really quickly. So they maintain that. I don't think they have a whole lot of work that requires them to do regular meetings or anything. So I think they're probably going to do meetings just via issues rather than having hangouts.
Well, I mean, yeah. So then, I was under the impression that this was mainly for build, but it's really cool that there are official Docker images for IHS. So, like, happy rubber stamp from me.
Okay, cool. Rubber stamp. I will document a rubber stamp in a moment, and we'll move on to. So this is the next one is pull request 1140, which was Bert's reverting the stream base, and I believe that the motivation from this came largely from the fact that we have so many Windows failures that we're catching up on, partly due to build team / Rod's fault, but also the leak in PayPal. Basically, there's a lot that seems to have shifted, and this would seem to be part of the problem. And I think the reason we're having this come to the TC discussion is around the process of merging large changes like this and how we can do it better, or if there is even a better way to do it. So, Bert, do you want to kick the discussion off?
Well, you nailed it there. Since Fedora fixed the issues, of course I'm not in favor of reverting his changes right now. But what I found a little bit disheartening is that this change was landed, and then we had basically the 1.4 series and the 1.5 series, which were all like pretty broken due to this. And also, if you look at the sort of the number of follow-up commits that were supposed to fix issues introduced by this change, I think that in hindsight it should not have landed. And that's not to say it's a bad idea, because I think it's actually a very good idea. But basically what we need here is like an NG or a really unstable branch where we get to test this stuff out for a while before it goes into master. And so I don't know if you want to come up with any any real policy for this. I think we do, but I have no verbiage to propose. But in general, big changes, I would say, they have to be tested on the side before they land. And
I agree, but the problem with an NG or next branch is who's going to test it.
It also gets us into the sort of release channel discussion that is, again, sort of perennial. How we actually build a canary branch. Just throwing that out there.
Well, I mean, so yes, I understand this is a major problem. I totally understand this is a problem. But I think it is, a high priority value that the releases that we make are good. So the reason that we don't really have a strategy right now is not an excuse. If we don't have a strategy, then we still shouldn't land these invasive things. And before landing it, you could bring it up or just create a branch for it and say, okay, I don't know where to put it, but I did it in a side branch because otherwise it gets released. I think that is what I'm trying to say here. It is, it's unacceptable. You wouldn't accept it from any other project to do it that way. If OS X was released totally broken and they said, yeah, well, sorry, we don't have a beta version, and by the way, nobody would use it anyway, so we just broke OS X. That would not be an excuse. And so, maybe I sound a little bit aggressive here, but I feel very strongly about this. It is unacceptable unless we say, okay, io.js is basically a canary version, but I don't want to do that. But if you think so, then say so. If we are serious about making stable releases, we have to be more careful.
I think this kind of goes back. So I agree that we do need to have a canary policy, and this kind of underlies the importance of getting one figured out and out there, because it seems like from the even odd versioning scheme that Node used to have, or that we used to have through Node, this would probably have gone out on the unstable odd version branch, and we're kind of clawing our way back to having something like that. So I guess yes, we have to figure that out and work on a way to get a canary branch. And the difference is whether we say that every point release of io.js is known stable, or if we say that we are going to curate these are known stable releases.
Exactly.
So,
That's a good one. And there's one more suggestion that I just want to throw out there. Trying things behind flags is really an option. I remember when we did the libuv transition, for a while, libuv would only be enabled if you used --uv, and otherwise it would just be running the old code. And that's something we might have done here as well, where you say, okay, -- experimental stream wrap, it uses new code, and otherwise it uses old code. This requires some internal infrastructure, but at least that that makes it easy for people to test a change while not breaking unsuspected users. I think that is also a really nice trade-off if you can get to that point.
So let me rephrase that. What about time-based releases, like for example Rust does and Chrome? We say, here's a stable branch, and every 4 months we merge the unstable branch into it, and that's the next stable. That's kind of the odd even version numbering, but with the upside that contributors don't have to worry or don't have to be afraid that their changes won't see the light of day until 2 years in the future.
I just want to weigh in, but about a bit different things that you talked about, Ben. Sorry. So I just wanted to say that basically the problem with putting these changes into unstable branch and having an unstable branch is that they're not actually going to be tested, so we're just delaying the situations that we had with the stream base. And in fact, the problem with stream base is that we probably didn't have that good testing for this. So it's not like a problem with the change itself, but yeah, the change was broken, but the fact that we merged it and had problems with a stable branch is probably the consequences that we didn't have enough tests for this. And if the same thing has landed into unstable branch as we did, for example, with TLS wrap in 0.12, there will still be changes. Oh, sorry. There will still be changes that will be needed once the people will start testing production, because yeah. So basically, raising it in a stable won't produce any different results from the stuff that we have experienced it with. Oh, sorry guys, I need to reply.
So the other thing that I don't have anything concrete here, but as somebody who's cutting releases, there's sometimes things emerge that 1.6 is actually kind of awkward, because we had the semver minor require flags for preloading modules come in, and then it was reverted, and then the only semver minor we had was the server listen, allowing the arguments connect. And that was the only thing justifying a 1.6, and there was a ton of other things that actually would have been good to just pull off and do a patch release for 1.5 on. And so, just as a release process, it would be nice to be able to control that a bit better, rather than just having to take the tip and release that. We have no branching mechanism at the moment, and I wouldn't even know what to do to if I was to do a 1.5 patch release at this stage. So there's that.
Yeah, I feel like since we're doing so much in minor releases, I feel like we should really be branching on the minors, and then once we're on a minor, that becomes a patch, and anything above just a basic patch or security fix goes into the next minor. That makes sense? I feel like at least that way it'd be easier to mentally delineate between what changes go where.
Yeah. So basically, what it then becomes. So right now we're basically in a mode where we don't care whether we release a patch or a minor. Depends on what's necessary. Like we either bump minor or patch. And you're suggesting we typically only bump patch, and then every now and then we merge minor changes. I think that makes sense. I mean, well, actually, to be honest, I am not so concerned about that we now bump to 1.6 for a relatively innocent change. But it sounds like Rod, for example, is concerned about that. Like he says, like, well, there is no good excuse, or there's like just a really minor change, and like, why do we have to bump?
We're gonna have to cut a 1.6, and when we do that, we cut a 1.6 branch, a 1.6.x branch, and then 1.x branch becomes 1.7, right? And then 1.6 just becomes patches and security fixes. Anything beyond that goes on to 1.7, and then when we say, okay, well, we're ready to release 1.7, we can merge them and release 1.7, and that becomes latest stable.
And do we land patch commits on 1.6x, or do we land them on 1.1 or 1x?
Both.
So we land them one place and we cherry pick them back, or do we land them first on 1.6x and then?
No, we land them on latest stable and then merge them to latest dev.
Okay.
In my experience, that's been the simplest way to delineate between these types of changes.
So what are we exactly solving with this?
So I think where we're getting to is we're wanting to project greater stability onto users. We're wanting them to not fear the upgrade process that we have, that we throw out a 1.6. We don't want them to fear upgrading to it. So and we want to also have the ability to push out patch releases quicker, that people will embrace more often. So people are much more likely to just download a patch release than they are to say, okay, there's a 1.6 out, I'm going to grab that now, because if we have breakage like we have had, we're going to stop people wanting to.
But we're using Semver, so it seems to me it's a matter of educating our users. An upgrade from 1.5 to 1.6 should be fine, because there will only be features added.
I really don't care about Semver. It just makes life more difficult. I know we are. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking out loud, but just using the minor release, I mean, just doing only bug fixes, simple patches, and security fixes on the patch release number is really straightforward, regardless of what versioning system you're using, right? And then we have latest stable, and then we have latest dev, right? And then if there's any question that something's bigger than a basic patch, it just goes on latest dev. Like, super easy questions to answer, tells you exactly where the patch needs to go.
I think Semver is even easier. You just tell people to always use the latest a minor version, because that's the latest stable version.
Exactly.
So I understand this. I understand, like, Semver, and like, we're embracing Semver for a good reason. But Semver makes so much more sense for libraries that use dependencies, and makes the sense that it makes for a project like Node, like io.js/Node, is a bit more dubious. So if we're just going to keep on throwing out features and patches and Semvering, what is the actual point of Semver? Like, what if we're just going to tell people just use the latest one? What is the point of actually doing Semver?
So Semver communicates, well, for our purposes, it's communicating that when users might need to upgrade their code, as I understand it.
Then we should be updating the latest major way more often. See, basically, I'm just taking an aspect of Semver and pushing it down to a minor. It's like, here are patches that are less than major but more than bug fix.
What I keep coming back to is that we need to have channels, which are for humans. There's a stable channel, and we actually promote releases, Semver releases, into that stable channel. Like, we know that they are stable, so we cut releases from the dev branch. What we are currently doing would be cutting releases into the Canary channel, And then as we know that one is stable, we say, okay, this is stable, and then we can backport patches to that.
See, you need to be careful about that, though. Like, when I was at Mozilla, one thing I saw that just confused the heck out of me is, like, they would have their nightly or, whatever, and then they'd have patches that go on to nightly, and they could float a patch in nightly for a long time while it was still being worked on. And so before they actually did the nightly build, they'd have like a dozen or more patches they'd have to rebase on top of each other before they could do the build, and it could be a merging hell.
So in this case, the nightly, so the Canary branch wouldn't have any patches floated. It would be the dev branch. So we wouldn't be floating patches there. We would be backporting patches out of nightly. So patch level commits, security fixes, we would be backporting those to a VNX branch, a minor branch.
Well, so why do we need the branches? Why don't just do the tags then? If we don't need to like put commits to different branches, like have patches on a canary and stuff like that, we could just use like release candidate tag, so like 1.6.1 RC, and just tell people that this is the next, this is going to be the next version. So like, I don't really feel like we need it, because who's going to use these canaries and who's going to report these problems?
Yeah, so I think I agree with Fedora, because I think what Fedora is saying, that for the stable branch we don't need separate branches. The only thing is for the next major version bump, yeah, that's something we need to figure out how to approach that. But as far as I can tell, or at least the way I see it,
but I feel like we're making exceptions for Semver for very small API change patches, right? It's like, well, this API change isn't big enough to be a major change, so we're going to throw it in a minor change. But the problem is that it's still not technically 100% compatible, but it's compatible enough for our reasons, and right there we're just completely breaking the idea of Semver. So why are we using Semver?
But what API changes in particular are you referring to? Because as far as I know, until now we've always had additions, but we've always been backwards compatible.
Yeah, this is exactly why we're using semantic version, to my mind. So like, it's not about the size of the change, but the backwards compatibility and adding a new API. So if you break compatibility or remove APIs, it's major. If we add new APIs and keeping the compatibility with all, it's a minor. So this was one of the stuff that I have advertised at Foxer, and I was like super happy, and other people super happy about it. They could just get new features without being afraid to break the existing code. So without waiting years for getting the next like minor release, as we did with Node.js.
Exactly, and I think we've been very good at it so far. So yeah, I personally don't see a reason to change. So only the. Sorry.
Well, the only thing we need is a separate branch to save major changes, and so we can release them like.
I feel like that. So the Canary, that's come up in the major proposal thing issue, and I feel like that defers the work of resolving merge conflicts. So versus like backporting patch level stuff to a known stable, we're now merging up all the minor and patch level stuff into a major, and that seems very much like what we had with the V12 versus V10 branches, where things would go in and it's an unknown amount of time before they hit that V12 branch, and figuring out the merge on that is very difficult.
Well, I mean, like, okay, I think I understand what you're at, but realistically, I mean, it took me a day or so to figure out what the differences were, and the only thing was, it had been months, it had been half a year since the last merge has been done. And there were some commits that were quite questionable, so that also makes it a little bit difficult. So I guess we should merge into the next major more often. But if you look at what our releases nowadays look like, there's like a ton of patch level changes and some minor changes, and there's so far, of course, there have not been any major changes. So what you're proposing right now is we put everything in dev, and then we're going to backport all the patch level changes to another branch. So that means that now, before Rob makes a release, he now has to cherry pick 40 commits before he can make a release. I mean, like I'm not sure, but that sounds way more painful to me.
I guess I just wanted to say, just to recap a bit, that the problem that we are now discussing is a bit more abstract than we pretending it to be, because all of the bug fixes, consequent bug fixes for the stream base that happened was actually bug fixes of the, well, most of them was bug fixes of the tests on the CI that was previously unseen by us. So the Windows build slave was a bit broken, and yeah, so we didn't see the test changes. Sorry, guys.
So I guess one of the problems we have here is that given the current trajectory that we've had, there is actually an increased risk for users on the minor bumps as we introduce features and things potentially break that we're not aware of, and so that what we're facing is a possible aversion to upgrading, even though we might feel just bumping the minor and patch are a trivial matter. I think we're already in a situation where, like Streambase is just one example, where introducing new things has introduced instability for users. So that's one of the things we're trying to address here. I don't have a suggestion.
Yeah, sorry.
I agree with that.
That's specifically what I was. That's exactly what I was addressing before. When I said it was not as major, that kind of streams or up changes what I was talking about, where it's like, well, this is big and it can have collateral consequences, but it's not exactly API breakage.
I think for that case, we definitely need better test coverage. I agree with Fyodor on that one. Because if we don't have the test coverage to know when a breaking change is a breaking change, then we are going to stand the risk of releasing something that breaks everybody as a minor.
Well, of course I agree that we need better test coverage, but what are we gonna say here? You know what we're gonna be? We're gonna make super unpredictable, unstable releases until we have better test coverage, which may be in a year or so. Like, that sounds like a bad excuse. I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I have a good feeling for what is a risky change. I know when I see one, if you will, and I think most of you do. So, in order to start with the desired output, and the desired output is safe upgrades or predictable changes. And if we work back from there, that means if something is really invasive, we somehow figure a way to test it extensively before we land it. Even if that means that as a part of that particular change, we add more tests, for example. But I feel it's a terrible excuse to say, well, our test coverage is not that good, so we will just break, we will break shit. That is a bad excuse.
Agreed. I'm mentioning test coverage as a action item to take away from this, not as a excuse for. So, cool.
Okay, I'm not sure we're going to resolve much here, but just as a concrete item, the OpenSSL thing. That the reason that we punted on the discussion earlier about OpenSSL was we were talking about version 1.6.0. It's actually a really big release. There's a lot of commits in there. And it probably would have been good to have a release half a week ago to iron this out, but just with the instability of some of the things coming in and out, it's been difficult to find a good moment to make a release. And now OpenSSL is presenting a likely patch upgrade to us tomorrow. So the question of whether we release a 1.6.0 and then a patch release tomorrow, the overhead of making a release is not a big deal, but from a communication perspective, is that fine, or is there anything we want to discuss around that?
If we're going to make another release tomorrow, then no one is going to use the release from today, so I guess there's no point in doing a release today.
I agree with Ben. The only thing is, like, since we have some problems with keeping our stuff stable, the suggestion I made is maybe we can release the version that's stable as of today with only the OpenSSL fix. Maybe that makes sense if it's not too much work. At the same time, I don't think so when people are running io.js in production right now. So.
I'm not actually in favor of backporting things to different minor releases and doing patch releases there. The overhead of that is quite big for what the likely usage pattern is. I think we just need to get better at for a start, defining what we're actually trying to communicate with Semver. And I understand that Semver major has big meaning, and we can all embrace that. But what are we actually trying to communicate with Semver minor and patch? That's kind of dubious, because if we're just going to tell people you should just be using the latest minor plus patch, like just use the latest of a major branch, then do we even need minor and patch? We're just communicating features. What's the utility in that? But maybe we shouldn't get into this discussion too much. We should move on, because there's like 3 issues on GitHub where you can argue about this stuff.
That's true. All right.
Okay, so let's move on.
But don't do the release today. Do it tomorrow with the OpenSSL upgrade. I think is what's coming out of this.
Okay, and we had one of the collaborators was already working on a branch for getting that ready, so we can release. I'll get everything ready on my end for 1.6.0, and then as soon as the OpenSSL thing comes in, we can release. And if it comes out like when I'm just gone to bed, then maybe Chris can do the release. If you're happy to do that, Chris, depending on timing.
I'd be willing to do that.
Cool.
Did we give a heads up to the website working group as well, so they can update?
Yeah, that usually happens just in GitHub. Just mention them, and they usually, if somebody is around to do that. We're also, I'm about to enable a new feature for them so that they don't need to do this anymore, so that the website is rebuilt on release and everything is just automatic. So that should come into effect soon. We're going to be testing that this week, and then hopefully that'll become active very soon.
Nice.
Okay, so Trevor's got to go, so he just wants to talk about the process next tick thing. So we're going to pull that up. That's issue number 1077. Trevor, do you want to kick off discussion here?
Yeah, basically that being able to pass arguments to process next tick is kind of a necessary feature if we want to flatten the function declaration structure in core. But the problem is that doing variadic arguments in the function call can cause the optimizations. And for something like process next tick, which is very performance sensitive, after doing a lot of testing, I found that the most efficient way was to do it using the set args API, where you actually set the function argument call after you create the process next tick. I know it's ugly. I fully recognize that it's ugly, but it's also the fastest way to do it. And in this one case, I'm willing to sacrifice how it looks over what performance hit I take. Also, the fact that I left it completely undocumented, and per request, I've also now underscored it. So it's about as private as it gets. At least we can use it internally to flatten. And I don't like the idea of making a special internal process next tick, because I feel like that will just add a lot of unnecessary noise in needing to especially require it and whatnot internally to use it.
I don't see a problem with that.
Neither do I. The only concern I have is that people might use it anyway, but that's their loss. Like, if we can be very specific about that they shouldn't.
If we take it out of readable stream, I'd be totally for it. Otherwise, there are kind of issues with importing or exporting readable stream.
So that's the problem, is that that's the one place where we need it the most.
Yeah. So I think what this ends up meaning is that if we do releases from that point on readable stream that import from io.js, that they have to be on a separate Semver major for readable stream. And I think that's the primary outcome, and it will no longer work on readable stream at that version. Will not work on Node 12 or 10 or potentially browser.
You can feature test that. Like, that's a really cheap feature test. At the top of readable stream, you'd feature test that, and then you branch based on whether it's there or not. Might end up with messy code, but it's possible.
Yeah, it splits a lot of functions though. Like there's
Well, I mean, you can still. Uh, hmm. You can
So
still.
can I just state the side of the objectors on this, because I'm sort of in the objector box. So far, I don't think there's actually is there a good example of an underscored method being removed from core? They effectively become de facto standards once they're in there. And this API is this is ugly API, and the kind of API that would hopefully disappear one day because we found a better way, or V8 optimized, bind or whatever. This is going to become something we're going to support, and people will use it. And so the concern is simply about exposing a very leaky abstraction, saying we couldn't add arguments to this thing because it was too slow, so we made it set args thing. This is a nasty API. And we're going to have to support it. It will become de facto, just like get active requests and get active handles is used by so many people, and they're underscored. So that's the objecting side of this.
Okay, and I completely understand your argument. Problem is, I don't know a way around it. That doesn't I've been doing some testing with the flag using REST arguments, and still, the function call itself will receive a performance hit because the function call itself becomes megamorphic after so long. If you based on varying number of argument calls, right? Yeah. So I don't know what to say to that. Basically.
Yeah, it's hard.
So what was the objection to using it as a private feature internally? Or is it like one of the private module features?
It's going to be a lot of hackery to go into every file and add a special require for that specific process next tick, unless we somehow magically only expose process.nextTick internally, or maybe we stop using process.nextTick and we just use some require magic nexttick or whatever. Either way, it's going to be a lot of code churn.
But I think that would be a good idea in the long run to more or less stop using process.nextTick, because a lot of user code also uses it and uses an internal variant that we can change however we like. Because the problem with process.nextTick is, of course, that all of userland uses it, so we can't really change it without breaking a lot of existing code.
Yes, that's also true.
So if we used symbols, and if we landed the internal module PR and had an internal module that exported a well-known symbol for setarg, then it would only have to change.
The problem with symbols, or at least with keyed property lookups, is that they're very slow compared to named property lookups, on the order of, I don't know, it's like 5 or 10 times slower. It's really yeah.
But you could do it once per file, once per module in core, like at the top. You don't need to look it up every time you want to use it.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. Still, it looks really ugly. I mean, aesthetics are important as well, right?
Exposing an ugly API. Trevor, what sort of speed increase are we talking about here? Do you have any metrics?
Okay, the major speed increase, excuse me, the major speed increase is the fact that we can flatten the call structure. Okay.
You mean that there's no longer an arguments adapter stack frame?
Okay, sorry. The ability to pass arguments one way or another removes the need to stack it. That's an obvious. But I mean, it can have a difference between 100 and 250 nanoseconds, but the problem is in some places like crypto, where you're doing a ton of crypto, nexttick can be called up to 100,000 plus times a second. at least from my testing. I haven't tested it in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know if something's changed, but I remember seeing if process next tick is actually used that often, and I remember specifically in crypto, next tick was called a lot.
Fedor, do you know why that is?
Well, I guess you're talking about a stream usage in crypto.
I think specifically it has something to do with TLS. Sorry.
A TLS.
I'll have to look it up. I can post numbers and specifics in the ticket.
I see
I
only
just
one
feel like
utility
because this is non-trivial and the discussion involves a lot of other things. I just wonder whether this needs a more compelling reason to merge it via numbers. So, can we increase the user experience of using certain APIs by merging this? And if it's like, if it's significant enough, then everyone's probably going to say, well, maybe that outweighs all of the negatives here. But at the moment, I think it's a little bit hand wavy, and it'd be good to have some more numbers on how users will experience this.
Okay, I will get those numbers in and update the ticket with them.
Okay. And then this might come back to another TC meeting, because I think this is actually a good discussion for TC to have around maintaining the integrity of the API and having good API.
Yeah.
So okay, let's move on. Thanks for that, Trevor, if you have to drop out. The last item on the agenda was, Michael nominated 2 people to join the TC. One of them was myself, and the other one was Jeremiah, otherwise known as Fishrock123. So there has been a little bit of side channel discussion about the process of nominating TC members, and I think it's generally agreed that it would be nice to have a bit more discussion before just having people be lumped into being nominated, particularly given that neither myself nor Jeremiah were even asked if we wanted to be TC members. I've lost my train of thought. Bert, have you got something to add here to help this discussion on TC members? Because I think you and I were discussing this before.
Yes, that's true. No, I don't really have anything to add. So, what we're not going to do right now is vote or add any people. So, in the side channel discussion, I think what we agreed on was that you were going to give it a lot of thought, Rod.
Sorry. I wanted to defer mine simply because I haven't had time to even think about whether whether my utility is increased by being on the TC or not. So I'd like to defer that vote at least.
And the other thing that came out of it is we will ask Jeremiah to join the next TC meeting. Well, if he can make it and wants to, of course. We don't know if he wants to.
The other thing is we haven't had a +1 from Jeremiah either in that issue, so we don't even know if Jeremiah even wants this. So that's kind of awkward too.
Exactly. And but yeah, and there are some thoughts about process, but I don't really. Do we have to discuss this right now?
No. I think the general consensus amongst people who discussed this earlier was that growing the TC is probably a good thing, and adding new people is a good thing, but we need to figure out a process that allows us to, people to be, asked first, and then for the TC to have a chance to digest and consider before coming back with, yeses or nos. So the path forward of this one is we need to ask Jeremiah if he actually wants to go ahead with this, and if so, then let's pull him into a TC meeting next week if he can make it, and then go from there. So have him participate in the same capacity that myself, Michael, and Dominic do to begin with, and then upgrade him to TC if there's no reason not to. So that's the state of that one at the moment, and my one, we'll discuss that later.
Yes.
Okay. So unless anyone else has anything to add to that or anything else we've discussed, then we might as well close the meeting up. So.
Yay! I can get lunch now.
The next meeting will be the 25th of March, unless anyone knows of any obvious conflicts with the 25th of March.
I have maybe one thing. When are we going to take a decision on how to handle major upgrades, major version bumps?
I don't see, this is just my perspective, I don't see any agreement really coming out of the issues that are discussing this. There's actually different points of view that are still being argued, so I'm not even sure that there's something that can be voted on.
But I think, so I don't know, but what I think we need is, even if we can't reach a final decision, we will need a working decision, right? Because there are patches coming in that are major version bumps, and we just don't know what to do with them right now. I don't have an idea, to be honest. Let's all prioritize thinking about this a little bit and actually get back to it. Keep coming back to it until we have something we can work with.
Well, I do have a proposal, and that's that I'm going to start an integration branch, call it the next branch if you will. I'm just going to land all the patches that would warrant a major version bump, perhaps upgrade VA to a 4.2 or maybe 4.3 just because I can, and start pumping out, well, not releases, but call it nightlies, call it whatever you will, just something for people to play around with, and then in a couple of months we can decide how to well go on with this. And I'll just start, or I'll keep merging in the stable branch into this integration branch. That at least gives us something to play around with. How does that sound?
That sounds a good working solution.
Sounds good to me.
Good.
Yeah, if Chris is happy with that, then that's great. I'm happy to work with you and to pump out some alternative nightlies, so we can have a nightly and a nightly canary or whatever it is, just so we can have releases out there. That sounds like fun.
Cool.
Gezellig.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Next meeting in a week's time on the 25th of March. Very good. Thanks for participating, and thanks for everyone for watching.
Thanks, Rod, for leading us. Thanks everybody else for joining. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye bye.
So,
Bye.
bye.